Palestinians and their supporters waited in hope this morning. Their cause carried by South Africa, which brought the case before the World Court. A few yards down the road,
bring them home.
Those who support Israel were apprehensive, adamant that the descendants of the Holocaust should never be accused of genocide. Inside, judges and lawyers for both sides took their places for a ruling that many see as a landmark in the history of international law.
Please be seated.
The presiding judge, conscious that her words would resound far beyond the courtroom.
The court is acutely aware of the extent of the human tragedy that is unfolding in the region and is deeply concerned about the continuing loss of life and human suffering.
The ruling was a victory for South Africa, as it requires Israel immediately to take all measures to prevent genocide against the Palestinians of Gaza.
In particular, A, killing members of the group, B, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group, C, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, and D, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group.
Even the Israeli judge voted in favor of requiring Israeli officials to stop making potentially genocidal statements and to allow more humanitarian aid into Gaza.
The court is also of the view that Israel must take measures within its power to prevent and punish the direct and public incitement to commit genocide in relation to the members of the Palestinian group in the Gaza Strip. The court further considers that Israel must take immediate and effective measures to enable the provision of urgently needed basic services and humanitarian assistance.
2,000 miles away in Gaza, the people whose suffering the ruling is meant to relieve were today fleeing fighting between the Israel Defense Force and Hamas in Khan Yunis. Pushed up against the border with Egypt, they're hungry, sick, terrified and desperate. Even though the judgment, which is binding under international law, fell short of requiring a ceasefire, the Israeli government may still refuse to abide by it.
Like every country, Israel has an inherent right to defend itself. The vile attempt to deny Israel this fundamental right is blatant discrimination against the Jewish state, and it was justly rejected. The charge of genocide leveled against Israel is not only false, it's outrageous.
The South Africans say that this is about more than Israel. What are the implications for international law?
Well, if Israel acts in accord with it, I think the implications are for a future hopeful world. Should it not, then essentially we are opening up room for all abusers in many conflicts throughout the world. And I think we'll be setting a terrible, terrible precedent.
Those watching outside the court hung on the judge's every word.
The court turns next.
Even though the court didn't call for a ceasefire, many felt it had dealt a major blow to Israel and its allies.
Finally, there is a glimpse of hope that the international law can be held, that there can be some justice found. That is what you are seeing now, is the little glimpse of hope that is going through the people that have been marching the streets for months and months. Finally now, people are seeing a glimpse of hope that this is possible, that Israel might be held accountable after all, and the complicit countries are hopefully next.
It will take years before the court reaches a verdict on whether or not Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. A few yards away, there's a memorial to the victims of the Second World War and the Holocaust that led to the establishment of the World Court, a reminder of why international justice matters.
Well, we're now joined by Israeli government spokesman Eylon Levy from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much for joining us. The court has decided there is a plausible case for Israel, a country which says it has an unwavering commitment to international law, proud of its democracy. There is a plausible case for it to answer that it might be guilty of the crime of genocide. It is a damning day for Israel, isn't it?
That's not exactly what the court said. The court said that it's not making any judgments on the merits of the case at all, or even the question of jurisdiction. What the court did was to reaffirm Israel's inherent right of self-defense, because South Africa tried to bring an action that would order it to cease its campaign against Hamas and abandon the hostages, and the court threw that out.
The court has decided there is a plausible case. The court has
Hamas.
decided there is a plausible case for Israel to answer on this question.
The court has said very clearly it is making no determination whatsoever on the merits of the case or even the question of jurisdiction. The merits, of course, being completely absurd, because on October 7th, it was the Israeli people who were the victims of an act of genocide by Hamas death squads, and we are fighting now to bring Hamas to justice and bring back the hostages.
Do I take it from what you say that despite the Prime Minister saying once again that the country's commitment to international law is unwavering, do I take it that Israel will not comply with the orders made today?
Our commitment to international law is unwavering, irrespective of any ICJ proceedings, as, by the way, is our right of self-defense. Now, we're studying those provisional measures. They appear so far to reflect what our obligations are already. The court reminded Israel of obligations that we have already said from day one we are upholding.
What the court did not say today, what the court did not say today is Israel should carry on as it has been doing. It said very specifically, Israel has to take all measures within its power to prevent killing Palestinians, to prevent causing them serious bodily or mental harm, to prevent deliberately inflicting conditions of life calculated to bring about the physical destruction of Palestinians with immediate effect. So what will Israel do differently as of today?
We are going to continue with the unprecedented efforts that we have been making to minimize harm to civilians. We're dealing with a unique urban battlefield that no army in the history has dealt with, a terror organization that has spent 16 years deliberately embedding itself under schools, homes, and hospitals to try to use civilians as human shields, to try to manufacture a humanitarian crisis that will create outrage that will force Israel to desist.
So could I just clarify?
Unclear.
Very sorry to interrupt you, but can I just clarify? Are you saying Israel will or won't comply with the orders of the court, or you're saying the orders are irrelevant?
Well, we're studying the provisional orders as they are. They came in just a few hours ago, and the legal teams are very carefully looking through it. But from a first reading, they seem to suggest that they're calling on us simply to reaffirm the obligations that we are already upholding.
They are simply not saying you can carry on as you have been doing. That is not what they're saying.
The court threw out an attempt by South Africa to order an immediate end to the war that would leave Hamas in power and the hostages in Gaza, and they upheld our right to continue fighting in accordance with international law, and we will continue making those efforts to minimize harm to civilians. Jackie, for us, civilian casualties are a tragedy. For Hamas, they are a strategy. Hamas is deliberately trying to manufacture a humanitarian crisis and maximize civilian casualties, and we are working to thwart that strategy against the barbaric terror organization.
Israel is signed up to the International Court of Judges, the International Court. Even the Israeli judge appointed by your government sided twice with the majority, including the ruling that Israel should immediately enable the provision of more aid and basic services for Gaza.
At the moment, Israel has excess capacity for aid to enter Gaza. We have placed no restrictions.
The court do not believe that Israel is allowing basic services to exist in Gaza. They clearly do not believe that enough humanitarian aid is being enabled to get through by Israel.
And that is not surprising, because look at where the court is getting its information from. It quoted UNRWA, the same organization that today admitted that it had terminated the contracts of members who had actively participated in the October 7 massacre. This is a deeply problematic organization that has been covering up the fact that Hamas is hijacking aid, covering up the presence of Hamas tunnels inside its schools and facilities. And this should serve as an urgent wake-up call about the quality of information, just if I could please complete my sentence, about the quality of information coming out of Gaza that Hamas is passing on to the deeply problematic organization of UNRWA.
Well, can I just ask you, sorry, very, very quickly, the court's dealt very, very specifically with information, with things that have been said by Israeli ministers, by Israeli politicians. The Deputy Knesset Speaker saying Israelis had one goal, erasing the Gaza Strip from the face of the earth. The Heritage Minister suggesting Israel drop a nuclear bomb on Gaza. What will you do now if public figures say things like this? The court has made clear you must now prevent or punish incitement to genocide. If public figures say things like this now, what will your government do?
When those remarks were made, the Prime Minister was very clear that they are absolutely detached from reality. What matters here when it comes to the court trying to ascertain genocidal intent is the decisions of the War Cabinet and the actions of the Israeli Defense Forces. And you see the deep attempts to try to mitigate harm to civilians, the unimpeded access of humanitarian aid, and that goes very clearly to show that this is a war against Hamas. As the Prime Minister, the Defense Minister, the War Cabinet, the Chief of Staff, those who actually make decisions have made abundantly clear.
Eylon Levy, thank you very much for joining us this evening. Sorry we got to end it there. Well, we're now joined by Noor Odeh, the former spokesperson for the Palestinian Authority, who's in the West Bank. Noor Odeh, as the government spokesman Eylon Levy said there quite clearly, the court stopped short of calling for a ceasefire. So what is the actual significance of the judgment today? It won't change much, will it?
No, I think it changed a lot, and it's his job to, of course, spin this in a way that is positive for Israel. But what the court said is, one, Israel will stand trial for genocide in the coming weeks and months. That two, Israel has to take measures to ensure that there are no genocidal acts against Palestinians. That means that genocidal acts are happening against Palestinians, and it means that the lie that Israel is allowing aid into Gaza was not accepted by the court.
The court did not. There was no finding of genocide, rather that the question itself stands. They're two quite different things, aren't they?
Of course. The case itself will be tried, and it will take months for the judgment on the accusation of genocide. But the fact that the court ordered those preventive measures or provisional measures means that the hearings will proceed. It means that Israel is accused of genocide. It has to defend itself against that accusation, and that there was enough evidence to concern the court, to concern the absolute majority of judges, that immediate measures are needed.
It did not call for a ceasefire.
Right. But how do you ensure that aid is provided without any impediment? How do you not cause killing and harm, physical and mental, to the population? How do you make sure that the evidence is not destroyed as ordered by the court? You can't do that when you're invading and bombing and killing displaced people and killing people raising white flags.
I mean, the critical point of this judgment in a court thousands of miles away is to, one assumes, in the end, stop the war, to prevent harm to civilians in Gaza. What happened today that makes any difference on the ground?
That's an important question, and I think that the viewers need to know and understand that what sets the Genocide Convention apart from others is that these rulings, this order, is binding to all members. So all states, including the UK, including all members of the European Union, they have to make sure that these orders are carried out, and they have to make sure that they're not complicit. So they have to make sure that they're not arming or supplying support that participates or take part or enables genocide.
Quite clearly, the court also said that Hamas had a very significant role to play. It ordered that the hostages were handed over immediately. Presumably you back that?
Yeah, I mean, again, this hearing was about the violation of a state party to the convention. And that's what was at stake. What was at stake, really, was the credibility of the whole system.
Just to be clear,
there was...
Just to be clear, you agree with the court that Hamas should now hand over the hostages straight away?
Well, really, my opinion is inconsequential. I'm an analyst, I'm a commentator. What this court has jurisdiction over and why this ruling was so important is because there was growing discontent in the global South, that this whole international system, the mechanisms of international justice weren't working for the peoples of the South. South Africa took charge. They changed that. They challenged the international system. And I think it's a good day today because the court basically delivered an order that said that international law applies to everyone without exception.
Very, very briefly, the US have already said they still believe allegations of genocide are unfounded. This ruling, you're arguing, needs to shift US and UK positions. Do you think that's likely? Very briefly, if you would.
I think the UK will come under increasing pressure, and I think the Biden administration also, with 50% of their voter base thinking or believing that Israel is committing genocide will also have to correct course in the coming weeks.
Odeh, thank you very much for talking to us this evening. Well, neither the government nor anyone from the Labour Party were available to come on the programme. But earlier I spoke to Sir Mark Lyle-Grant, a former security advisor for the Prime Minister and former UK ambassador to the UN. I asked him where the court's ruling does leave the UK.
Well, I think the United Kingdom is going to have to take very serious note of this judgment because although the court did not find, obviously, for genocide, that'll be for the final hearing or the final judgment, which won't come for a couple of years, and they didn't call for an immediate ceasefire. They did say that they had jurisdiction. They did say that there was a plausible case to answer, and they did impose certain interim measures, so-called interim measures on Israel. So I think the British government is going to have to look very seriously at this judgment and adapt its policy towards Israel and the conflict accordingly.
The Prime Minister was one of the first leaders to pledge his support to the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, saying, "I'm proud to stand with you in Israel's darkest hour." Is there an issue now that pride would look misplaced after an international court to which the UK as signatories has decided there is this plausible case to answer?
Well, clearly the situation has evolved. In the immediate aftermath of 7 October, a number of countries stood shoulder to shoulder to Israel, and I'm sure that was absolutely the right position for the British government to take. But equally, it's important that in private, the language was always that Israel should respond in a way that meets international humanitarian law and does so in a proportionate way of self-defense according to international law. Now, the language has shifted in the last 3 months very clearly, and you've seen it most recently with Lord Cameron, the Foreign Secretary, calling for an immediate pause leading to a sustainable ceasefire. This is tougher language in public than the British government has used before. But the government still has this difficult balancing act to tread because they want to retain influence with the Israeli government, and that means being publicly very supportive of the government, but at the same time to be able to steer it in private in a direction that is more suitable to, responding to the allegations of violations of international law. If Britain suddenly switched its position in a very public way, then it would lose all influence and leverage over the Israeli government.
You talked at the beginning about the need to perhaps look again at policy, for example. I mean, one critical area, the UK has licensed arms worth over £44 million to Israel between May 2015 and August 2022, according to analysis of government export data. Is this something they may be forced to look at again?
I think this probably is an area where there will be some pressure on the British government to review its policy. I don't think probably any export licenses have actually been issued since the 7th of October, but I think making a judgment now that they're not going to issue any new export licenses for arms to Israel whilst this conflict is going on, I think would be a sensible response to this ICJ judgment.
Mark Lyle-Grant, thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you, Jackie.